Today, repeats and ornaments. I'll be using the Shinobue today, but almost everything that I'm saying today equally applies to the shakuhachi. So if you follow me for my shakuhachi tutorials, this is also for you. Let's start by noting that tonguing is not used in traditional Japanese flute music. So you may know that in Western flutes, when you repeat a note or when you start a note, you use t, 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 t to make a clean start for the note. This is not used in Japanese music, at least not in the traditional music. You can, of course, use tonguing if it suits the music, but for the traditional music, this is not done. So basically everything is played legato. So what happens if we have to repeat a note? For Western flutes, we would just use the tonguing. Instead, what is done is that you lift the finger very quickly so that you get a short break in the note and that it is clear where the next note starts. For this, it is very important that the break is short enough. You don't want the bit in between to become an extra note and become part of the melody. So you don't want this. You could identify the bit in between when I played it this slowly as a separate note and also as a particular rhythm. Instead, you want to be very quick, as I already said. So, to give you an example of a song that I'm sure you know, Sakura Sakura, this starts by repeating the first note and then going one note higher. And this repeat is done by quickly lifting the finger. And the next note, you may have noticed that I'm not using any particular technique there, so there is no tonguing or no definite start of the following note. This is just played legato. The next question then is, which finger do you lift? So for example, if I play a 2, I have many fingers to choose from that I could use to repeat the note. You probably heard that some fingers work better and other fingers don't work so well, and you should just use the finger that works best. Usually this is the lowest finger. So for 2, you would use this finger here. For 3, you would use this finger. For 4, you would use this finger, and so on. This, however, is not set in stone, and you can always adapt that to the needs of the music and to what works best for you. There is, however, another way. You don't have to lift the finger. You can also tap the note below. So instead of, you can do, instead of, and if you think of 7, all the holes are open. Using this finger doesn't do anything to the pitch. So tapping the lower note is actually your only choice. Another note that often is a bit problematic is 0, so everything closed except for the left middle finger. Using the pinky works, sort of, but it's not very clean. Using the ring finger works, but this is a finger that is quite difficult to control. It's just basic human anatomy. This is a problem finger for all instruments. So I often use the index finger or the middle finger of the right hand. Then, depending on the piece, there is also a third way that you can consider, which is not using a finger for repeating, but just making the airstream very weak in between. So usually you wouldn't break the airstream completely, so not. This is not very precise, and you have to take care that the pitch doesn't drop too much in between the 2 notes, but it may be quite suitable for certain quiet and slow pieces. So that's the third way that you can consider. As an aside, this is not a repeat, but if you want to make a strong start with a note, you can come from the note above and then as soon as you start blowing, bring down the finger. So that you basically don't hear anything of the note before, or if you hear something, I played it very slowly now for demonstration purposes, so if you hear anything before, then it should be very, very short. Closely related to the topic of repetitions is the topic of ornamentations. In traditional Japanese music, many ornamentations are being used, and it is really up to the player to add these ornaments because they are not considered as being part of the melody, but just giving an extra flavor, an extra fragrance to the melody. This is comparable to using vibrato, for example, on instruments, which is also usually not set, which is not composed into the piece, but which is just an interpretation, an expression in the moment when you play the music. Ornamentations can be very elaborate, and I encourage you to make up your own ornamentations. I'm going to explain just a few basic ornaments here. The most basic ornament is that when you go one note up, so for example, if you go from 4 to 5, instead of just straight lifting your finger, you lift 2 fingers and then you bring down 1 finger so you get to 5. So basically what you're playing is 4, 6, 5. But the 6 in between is very short. It sounds like this. And you can basically use the same pattern when you go down. So say I go down from 6 to 5. Instead of going down directly, I go down 1 note further and then I go up again. So just as we had with going up, we're going up 2 and going back 1. When we go down 2 and then we go back up 1 again. So the first variation of this idea of ornamentation is that instead of lifting both fingers at the same time, you lift them in sequence. So you lift the lower finger first, and then you lift the second finger, and then you go back down to the note. So I'll play it very slowly. And you can do the same pattern for going down. So the one that we had before was go down 2 and go back up 1. And now we just go down in sequence and go back up 1. So, or a bit quicker. The next quite straightforward way to do an ornament is to use double taps. So going down from 6 to 5, for example, instead of just going down directly, do a double tap of the target note. This requires that your finger is quite loose. Basically, the feeling that you want is that you let your finger fall down onto the flute and let it bounce back up briefly before it goes down again. Doing this with any kind of muscle power is very difficult and is basically impossible. I can't even do it. And the good thing about double taps is because this is not part of the melody, if your finger falls down but fails to bounce back up, it's no problem. So for playing the piece or for playing a melody, this is just the same. It makes no difference. It's just that the ornamentation is not there. It's a bit like using a different intonation when you're saying a sentence. It doesn't change the meaning of the sentence. It just changes the way in which you're saying it. One final thing I want to mention is that if you start a note with a tap, with a quick lift of the finger, this is basically an ornamentation as well. So for example, at the start of Awa Odori, you can just start straight, but it's nice to have a quick lift of the finger on the first note instead of. It just makes it sound a bit more playful and it gives a bit more weight to the note. Basically like saying, here we go, let's dance. So as you can see, repeats and ornamentation is not really very difficult. In principle, it requires practice, of course. The important thing is to have these repetitions and these ornamentations quite quickly and with very relaxed muscles in your fingers. If they get too long, they become part of the melody, and they are not part of the melody. They just float above the melody, if you like. I hope this video was useful for you, and as always, please subscribe, please ring the bell so you get notified when I release a new video, and please leave me a comment if you have any questions or if anything was unclear or you would like to suggest a topic for a new video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!